Hey, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon on the East Coast. Welcome to Radio 5G. This is Michael Henry Dunn with my esteemed co-host, Nancy L. Hopkins. Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning, Michael.
So,
Hey, when I just said good morning, Michael, I glanced at the station timer, and it was 111. Because when I messaged you this morning on Skype, it was 1111. 11 a.m. And now I just said that to you, and so we got, a lot of... See, they say that those little number things are a pat on the back by the guides or universe of spiritual intervention telling us that we're doing a good deed here. So let's have a great radio show.
I like that. I saw that you sent me a text message and you said, hey, look at the time when I sent it to you. Now, for you, it was 11:11. It's auspicious. It's, divine balance and all the rest of it. For me, I'm here in Mountain Time, and you go, hey, look at the time. It's very auspicious. And it was 9:11.
Isn't that interesting?
Okay. Yeah. I said, okay, well, I don't know if that's auspicious, but it's certainly a wake-up. Yeah, 19 years ago, you'd think we'd have woken up by now, but, well, let's go with 11:11. I like that better. So, as usual, we've got interesting things to share with you, and some of it is as yet to be revealed because it just comes out of Nancy and I exploring the previously unexplored realms of witty repartee, deep exploration, and all the rest of it, right?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's ever been done before. I mean, probably there's a lot of other people out there just going with the flow of whatever comes into the conversation. We're on a boat going down the river, and hey, look at that! Oh my God, isn't that beautiful? Oh, look at that! Oh, yeah. So,
well, here's my favorite piece to lead off the morning with in my scanning of what's going on in the world. So we're talking about the lockdown in various states and then in various countries, and are they easing up? Are economies reopening? Well, I like to keep in touch with what's going on in the land of my ancestors. So over in Ireland, they've had the lockdown, and they've been having a great challenge in the pubs of how to maintain this 6-foot distance thing, or 2 meters thing, as they call it. And so they've recently decided in Ireland that they just have to. This is the Republic of Ireland, mind you, not Northern Ireland, not the UK. In the Republic, they've decided it's time to relax this thing in the pubs about the 2-meter distance. And it's just so hard to enforce. But they've imposed a new limit. They said, all right, you can get as close to each other as you like. No more of this stuff about you have to be 6 feet apart. But you can only be in the pub for 90 minutes total. You've got to get out of the pub after 90 minutes. I'm going, oh, that's great. Okay. So how many pints of Guinness can I drink in 90 minutes? Now, I can make these jokes because I'm Irish-American, right? The Irish drinking jokes. But I just love that. They say, we're going to relax this 6-foot rule. But God, you got to get out to the pub after 90 minutes. It's just too close. So anyway.
Well, can they go outside the door and then come back for another 90 minutes?
Well, you see, this was always the thing about pubs in Ireland. They had some kind of law in Ireland about, all right, the pubs close. The pubs absolutely close at 10 o'clock. I'm thinking it was 10 o'clock. I'm making that up. 10 p.m., the pubs are closed because, Ireland is a decent, God-fearing Catholic nation. And, all the stereotypes to the contrary, we don't, just go about promoting endless drinking. But the fact of the matter is that the main thing was to make sure that you got into the pub before 10 p.m., because they would technically lock their doors and then they'd stay open until 3. They'd say if you were in the pub, you could keep drinking until about 3 a.m. My God, you better get in there before 10. So anyway, none of this is as serious material as is warranted by our situation. Oh, this is great.
Wait.
I gotta wait,
Oh,
just
okay.
a second. I
All
gotta tell
right.
you this. So when I just said none of this is warranted by the serious material, my iPhone is next to the laptop, and immediately Siri goes, "Yes, what can I help you with?" Because I said things are serious. One moment. See, there she goes. All I said was serious, and this girl is listening so hard to every word we say. It's getting way too scary. Anyway, I'm
Wait,
sorry. You were saying
did I tell you about the story with Siri? Because I don't have it on. I mean, it's just like I push the button and talk to it, and it never answers the question. I mean, it never answers the question. So I give it another shot, and whatever it came up with was so bogus, it was like stupid. And I said, Siri, and I said a bad word. You're a... And the Siri thing said, "That's not nice." Freaked me out, Michael. I have not used it since.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
really freaked me out.
It'll do that. Yeah, and I've heard guys, playing with Siri and going, "Hey Siri, talk dirty to me." I don't know. See now,
can't. I'm as clean as the driven snow.
See, there you go. She jumped in, and I didn't even know I was talking to her. She'll give you some smart answer like that. I can't. I'm as clean as the driven snow. Another answer that somebody told me she gives, if you say that, talk dirty to me thing, that Siri will come on in her clean, crisp, serene voice. When you say talk dirty to me, she'll say rocks, sand, gravel, mud. She'll start listing various kinds of dirt to you. Anyway, let's get on to more. I'm not going to use the word.
Well, let's go back. Let's go back to the Irish thing you were talking about. Okay, because I find it ironic that you and I both come from a family of 10, and that we're both got Irish ancestry.
Right.
And that Irish ancestry is fascinating because I have a couple of relatives who attempted to do ancestry search, and they would get the family through the United States, but when they got back to Ireland, they couldn't go beyond it. There was no database, there was no information, and so they discovered that, well, what happened was that one of my cousins who was involved in it said to his wife, "Let's just go on over there and see what we can find." So they did, and they looked for anything with a Connor name. It was my grandmother that was, fully Irish, and so they looked for anything that was the Connor name, and they found a pub. Okay, with the Connor pub.
Sure.
So
of course,
right, and they also found that there was a bread and breakfast not too far from this, just down the street. So they booked the bread and breakfast, and they got there, and it was fairly late. And the keeper of the house said, "Well, you're gonna have to go down to the Connor pub to get anything to eat because it's past, we've already served." And so they said, "Yes, well, we were going to go there anyway," because they tell them the story about the Connor name, and she goes ballistic because her family owns the pub. She is a Connor, and now out of the blue comes these cousins from the States, right? She was just like, "Oh my God," and so they go over there, they get something to eat. Well, the next day, she throws a party for them with all the relatives.
Oh my gosh!
Isn't that funny? But what they did learn quite a bit about their family, about our family, because the reason that the documentation wasn't there was that there was very little documentation as to birth and statistics as families and what do they call it when they census, when they didn't have that type of thing. The documents were at best in the churches. In this case, Catholic churches.
Right. I was going to say, yeah.
Right. Yeah. But what happened was that it all like the vast majority of Irish people all left from basically the same area, the same port. So that's what you get as far as the port, but you can't get beyond it. So really they had to go there to find out, anything more about the family. But what they found out was that the Connors in England, in Ireland, are considered royalty. That
of course.
The Connor name goes back to the kingship of Ireland. And, so I just thought that was a hoot, that, we're actually part of the royal family, maybe. How many generations away from
it? Last High King of Ireland, I think, was Brian Boru. And, because, the High King was sort of king over many other smaller kings and tribal chieftains and all the rest of it. But the main thing was the High King's job was to get everybody together to fight the English, when the occasion arose, as it often did. I had the same thing. A few years ago when I was working with Neil Keenan and doing some writing on his activity over there in Indonesia with the Global Collateral Accounts. Neil has an Irish passport, and I was all jealous. I said, "Oh man, you've got an Irish passport," and he's born in Rhode Island, right? And I said, "Well, how to get this?" Well, my grandfather was Irish born. I said, "Oh gosh, well, I should check, because I'm Irish on both sides, but also German. My dad's mom was German, Austrian, strictly speaking." So I thought, it turns out with me, it's great-grandfather was Irish born. And I was surprised because I thought it was my great-great-grandfather. Came over during the famine, fought in the Civil War. But it turns out that that's actually my great-grandfather. My father's grandfather came over, at like age 10 during the famine. And they settled in New York. And then when he was 15, Civil War started up, and he ran away from home to join the Union Army. But they said, "Kid, you're 15. No, send him back home." Turned 16, joined back up, just in time to fight at Gettysburg, right? And so he fought at Gettysburg. His whole platoon got wiped out, and he ended up like a sergeant at 16 because everybody else was dead. But he ended up, staying with the Union Army for the remainder of the war. Sherman's, march to the sea and all the rest of it. And I love this about like what you and I are doing here with Radio 5G and, and the cabal and what's going on with the infection, all the rest of it. We're out there, quixotic, crazy freedom fighters. Well, my great-grandfather, like I might have told this story already, forgive me if you've heard it, but a lot of Irish veterans of the Union Army in the Civil War ended, and they said, look around at all of us. We're Irishmen, and we're battle-hardened warriors. What can we do with this? I said, well, let's free Ireland. Yeah, well, we're over in the States. How are we going to free Ireland? So they all got together and formed the Fenian Raiders, and they staged an invasion of Canada. So we're going to invade and conquer Canada and then trade it for the freedom of Ireland. We'll negotiate with the Brits and trade. We've got Canada. We'll trade it for Ireland. Anyway, I just love this, that my great-grandfather was, he joined up and he marched north to Canada. And I looked it up on Google and I found a marching song that my great-grandfather almost certainly sang. And the words of it go, we are the Fenian Raiders, skilled in the arts of war. We've come to fight for Ireland, the land that we adore. Many a battle we have won, along with the boys in blue. And now we'll go and conquer Canada, for we've nothing else to do. So, anyway, that's my little Irish ancestry story.
I love it. I love
freedom
it.
Stuff.
But you know the on Say What last Saturday, I was with Ani Abedisian and Dolly Howard, and Ani's from England, and she probably knows more about American history than most people do. She's just adores this country. And she and I got into a conversation about Black Lives Matter. And I was saying to her that, yes, Black Lives Matter, but so do a lot of other things, I mean, it's like they don't seem to have an understanding of actual history. the people that are out there screaming and hollering at us that we need to bend down to and ask forgiveness. No, sorry, not going to do that. And my point was that, look, the Civil War began over economic and taxing reasons. That's where the turmoil of the the differences between the North and the South. And then it became states' rights when they decided to leave the Union. And when the South was basically constitutionally, legally could go away from the Federation, Republic, and they are setting up this new country, so to speak. The North tried to get, an army together, but they couldn't. And so what started happening was they started to make the war about freeing the slaves. Now, this says a couple of things. It first off says that you've got an entire population of basically white Americans in the North who won't respond and go to war over economic and taxing and state rights. But when they believed in the abolitionists, I want to say abolitionists, the abolitionist program of freeing the slaves, that's when they joined and became an army. When the black people of today are screaming and hollering and yelling at me and you about, well, let's just look at this. If it wasn't for white American, Northern Americans that went and laid down their lives to the tune of 320,000, okay? The South had, I think, like 285,000. This was the most expensive war per life that we have ever. If you take all the wars that we have fought for the last 200 years, add them up, they do not add up to that one figure of 325 of the Americans, white Americans, that fought to free the slaves.
Well,
it's like, let's just get real here. And then Ani went into an amazing discussion about white indentured people, and a lot of them coming from Ireland.
Well, yeah, that's actually something I was just reading about a little bit ago.
Really?
Now, yeah, that and this goes back to Cromwell and the Commonwealth when they overthrew the monarchy in England for a while, and that's when some of the worst things happened in Ireland. But it was not indentured servitude. That's the word they like to use. It was flat out slavery. Irish men and women and children were flat out sold to the Americas as slaves, not indentured servants, separated from their families, lined up and thrown onto ships just like the Africans were. That's, they said, hey, well, you're rebels and we can do what we want with you and this is what we're going to do. So, that's historical fact. Now, when it comes to the Civil War, I'm something of a student of the Civil War, and I've got a different view on it than the one you articulated. I mean, if you go to, you can't minimize slavery as the primary initial cause of the war, and I don't want our show here to be about going into that. The fact is that Lincoln knew very well that if he pushed slavery, ending slavery as the reason to join up, he'd get a full-scale rebellion on his hands in the North, because it was a very gradual thing to bring people around to the idea that, hey, slavery was the cause of the war, and at some point, as a military necessity, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, under my constitutional authority during a national emergency as a military necessity because the slaves are being used to support the rebels, and therefore in the country, in the territory that is controlled by Union military, those slaves will be free because the enemy is using them. The rebels are using them, as their military asset. That was the rationale. But if you go to the raid at Harper's Ferry, you got this crazy guy, old John Brown, and this small band of people. They were trying to start a slave insurrection, like a wildfire across the South. He was this on fire, anti-slavery abolitionist prophet. It was insane. It was badly planned. It was bungled. It was insane, and it scared the bejesus out of the South because they were all raised on the horror stories of what happened in Haiti when the French Empire was thrown out by the only successful slave rebellion in history, and the white population was absolutely massacred. And the Southerners grew up on that fear that they were going to have a slave rebellion. And so, the Union government went after John Brown, shot one of his sons, rounded them up, put him on trial, and hanged him. But at the same time, this noble guy is saying, yes, well, I'm happy to die for the cause of freedom, and this is the iniquity of slavery. He won all kinds of admiration and sympathy. And for the South, that was like the last straw. They're reading about, okay, you're going to go ahead and hang the guy because he was going to start a slave insurrection, which would have meant the rape and murder of our families. And now you're all talking about what a noble character he is. I mean, for a lot of the South, you just read the newspaper reports at that time. It was like, we are done with you people. You're making a hero out of this guy who was inciting a slave rebellion that would have just totally decimated our lives and our families and all the rest of it. I mean, there were many things like that where graduates, like what we're seeing today, there is this absolute inability of one side to understand the point of view of the other. And what one side says, hey, come on, these are facts. And I say, oh, yeah, look at the source of your facts. That's fake news. Same thing was going on back then. Like the inability of people to talk to each other about what's real and what's not. And to me, I mean, somebody brought this up. Eleni was bringing this up to me just the other day. She saw a post and said, all right, what happened to George Fletcher was horrible and inexcusable. And yes, there are all these things to be George Floyd. Thank you. Sorry. George Floyd. Thank you. But she saw a post that said, can we please remember and focus on, how many 37 unarmed white people were killed by police and 20 unarmed black people were killed by police in the last year or so. Okay.
It was actually. Well, I've heard I heard 10 and 20, and I heard 9 and 19.
Okay, yeah, something like that. Yeah,
but it was right. And they were unarmed, white or black. Then it was white that got killed more.
Yeah, well, there's a bigger white population by like 85%. 15% African American. But my point was that this one was saying, it's not as if this isn't a concern. If we're going to be having riots in the streets, can we be having riots in the streets over the systematic kidnapping, abuse, torture, and murder of children in the pedophilia rings that are being used as the key blackmail lever to control politicians, and this sick satanic system that's going on, of which there is massive evidence. I mean, if you want to, everybody's going nuts about Bill Gates and his proposed vaccines. Well, Bill Gates made 17 trips with Jeffrey Epstein to the pedophile island. Shall we start there? Okay, so, if we want to talk about what we should be inflamed about, how about the sixth extinction event? How about the systematic, poisoning of 5G? Okay, this is, you can't just say that, okay, racism doesn't matter. Obviously it does. And yet this is, a tailor-made distraction from what's really going down and how we are really being controlled. Anyway, that's my speech.
And I agree with you totally. And, I had not ever put in the fact that the Haitian rebellion, the black people that took up, had happened at that time frame. I've never sort of gotten introduced to the concept that, wow, this had already happened. I knew it had happened, but I didn't put it in reference
Yeah,
to
well,
the
it was
Civil
earlier.
War.
I mean, the Haitian Rebellion was earlier. It was like 1805.
Right.
But
Yeah.
believe me,
Exactly.
the horror of that flowed across the South and was a nightmare legend for years. They grew up with that reality.
Interesting.
And they were a lot of refugees, French refugees, came to the South from Haiti, and when, I mean, if you try to put yourself in the point of view of people who have been enslaved, who are being, beaten and raped and enslaved, and you have no life and no future and no freedom, once you get a chance to overthrow that system, it's like you've got nothing to lose. And it gets ugly fast. It gets, as ugly as anything can get. But that's because, it's in response to something that is intrinsically evil and ugly to begin with.
Well,
but
let's just, mention the fact that in the South there were many, 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 probably the preponderance of the slavery and the owners. The owners were not, excessively generous to them. They, had a lot of attitude problems, but they did keep them in a fairly good environment because they needed them healthy. And so at the very base reason for doing it. I mean, I think one didn't, but most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence had slaves in the South, Southerners. So George Washington had slaves. But, so there's all of these, different things that you could, like you can say, well, why aren't we talking about what happened to the Irish people? That they were in, actually I agree with you, it was slavery. They call it indentured, but it was slavery. But, it's like all of this stuff that happened in the past. And I said on the Say What show, I said, okay, I'll agree with it. We did all this terrible stuff. I said, but if you're going to go with that philosophy, then the whole country has to move and leave it to the Native Americans. We got to get out of it, So it's like, leave the past where it is, for crying out loud.
I mean, there's. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, because I've been analyzing the way that this whole, the progress of this rebellion, because it is a rebellion, and it really starts out in the streets of California, where they wanted to get out of their houses. They wanted to stop being under house arrest, and so they start going into the streets, right? And then they have this orchestrated, and I do believe it was an orchestrated assassination of George Floyd, to instill this uproar of emotion in other people. And so you've got the example of the people going to the streets to get out of their houses, First Amendment questions. And then you have the situation of, murder in the streets by the police. And God bless the good police officers, but the system of policing needs to be addressed. The way they're trained, and I mean, when you think about it, why weren't they more intricately tied into the psychiatric community, the community that helps people, that knows about homeless people and what's in their minds, instead of sending out police officers? So there's a lot of things that very little tweaking could probably make it very, very workable. But on top of that, you got the situation of the Antifa and the militants, and these are trained militia, not militia, but military. They're paid military. Okay, right. These are people who were trained to do this. This is why I kept saying going to the houses right now is the best thing we can do, because from a totally military standpoint, you've got these groups that are already trained and out there and have been working. And, when you look at the history of the Black Lives Matter, it actually seems to have come out of Germany. And it was an anti-fascist movement. a very strange connection to this, whatever this thing is. It's got so many. It's very interesting. I mean, just from tactics of military tactics. How are they doing this? Now, a lot of the people that believe in Black Lives Matter, they're not part of it, but they're using this narrative, let's say, in order to, when they were doing the throwing bottles at the police and starting the violence, it was coming from the back of the crowd. They were using these good, honest protesters. There's something wrong. We got to do something about it. From the back and throwing things that then causes the police to react. And who's in front of them? Well, the good people. So this is just very, very military-looking tactics, the whole thing. So when you get to the point we're at now, you've got more black people being killed by police, and you wonder, I just really, really feel for these people. It's like, yes, and you can see it from. There's nobody at fault here. It's the environment they're in now. It's kill or be killed. For both sides. There's 800 and some police officers that are hurt or dead. There's, I think, two of them or three. One of them is paralyzed. And then there's 2, I think, that have been killed. I know of one. I think there's a second one. But see, I don't even know. And so you got a situation here where all of a sudden the enemy becomes these statues.
Right. I love the story where there's a petition circulating to take down all the Confederate statues in the South and replace them with statues of Dolly Parton.
I heard that.
I love that. I don't think Dolly would go along with it. She's too modest, but that's a good idea.
The thing of it is that when they started going after the statues, as a historian, I got my degree from college in history. And my senior year, I was a voting member of the Faculty of History at the University of Massachusetts. So history is paramount. If you don't know the past, you're, condemned to do it again in the future. So I really believed in that philosophy. And I'm like, why are they tearing these? This is plus the fact that it was so. Why? I've never seen a revolt where they went after the statues. Maybe I wasn't looking for it, but this has gotten. They're tearing down Columbus, and I understand that Winston Churchill is under attack in England. What are these people?
What's the rationale for that?
I know. So you're going like, what is this? But then I listened to this young black man. He was probably in his early 20s. And he was from Boston, and they were going to take down this, or they wanted to get rid of this very well-done statue of Lincoln with a slave, a black man, with the chains coming off, but he's on his knees in front of Lincoln. And all I heard was they were going after Lincoln, and I thought, oh my God, why are they going after Lincoln? If it wasn't for Lincoln, they wouldn't be freed. Don't they know their history? But then I listened to this black guy, and he said, all my life I've seen that from time to time, and every time it instills me with real distress. And it's because of the black man kneeling in front of a white man. Never mind the rest of the story. And when he pointed that out to me, I was then, oh my God. There's all these subtle symbols that are there that we're not even aware of. And, from that moment on, I said, take down the statues. Let's start over.
Yeah, and that, does injustice to Lincoln himself, also, that statue. Because,
absolutely.
Because Lincoln, you want to, you read about Frederick Douglass, right? Born a slave. He escaped, he educated himself, and he became this impassioned, eloquent orator who was, speaking to crowds across the North. And he was very disappointed at first in Lincoln when Lincoln was elected, because he thought Lincoln's just lukewarm, and, he's walking this middle path, and he's, trying to placate everybody and trying to keep the Union together instead of, getting serious about getting rid of slavery. But then as the war progressed, he began to be impressed with what he saw as Lincoln's strategic wisdom and his integrity. And he was actually invited to the White House to meet with Lincoln. This is the first time, that a black man had been invited to meet with the president in the White House, as an equal. And there's a speech that Douglas gave immediately after that, and he said, "I have never been in the presence of a white man with whom I was made to feel just completely as an equal. There was no consciousness of race superiority. It was man to man." He said, and if you want to know how the president treated a black man in the White House, that's who we've got in there. And, and this is coming from somebody who had been a slave and knew very well what that, unconscious assumption of superiority and control was that, North and South ran through. Just because, a lot of black folks say, hey, Lincoln was a white supremacist. He sure was. Because every white politician in the North, if he was not a white supremacist, would not have gotten elected. All that meant in those days, as Lincoln himself said in one of the Lincoln-Douglas debates, he said, well, given the situation, if one race needs to be, in a superior position over the other, I'm a white man, and sure, I just prefer that it be my race that's, in the superior position as to be enslaved. He said, but, Judge Douglas, he's talking about Stephen Douglas, his opponent in the Senate, he said, when it says all men are created equal in the Declaration, well, maybe that doesn't mean that every black man in the South is the intellectual equal of Judge Douglas, but in his right to earn his bread by the sweat of his own brow, he is the equal of Judge Douglas and of every man living. And, and that's what, gets back to the point. But it is, that I've seen that statue of Lincoln, with the slave in chains, kneeling at his feet like, oh, thank you, great white father, for giving me my freedom. It's like, well, we're all born free. It's not to be given to us. There's a wonderful clip making the rounds. Maybe you've seen it, Nancy. Morgan Freeman. Have you seen that on Facebook, interview with Morgan Freeman?
No, I have not.
Well, it's an interview with Mike Wallace. It's from some years back. And Mike Wallace is asking him, what are your views on racism in America? And Morgan Freeman grew up in the South before civil rights, I think in Mississippi, right? And he said, you want to end racism? Very easy. Don't refer to me as a black man. I won't refer to you as a white man. And don't give me Black History Month. Do you have a White History Month? I don't know. And Wallace says, well, no, I'm Jewish. He says, well, do you have a Jewish History Month? Do you want a Jewish History Month? And said, well, how about American history? Because black history is American history. Jewish history is American history. You keep talking about color and religion and race. And this is the whole tribalization thing. As long as they can keep us talking about all the ways we're different, we're not going to focus on how we are alike and how we can act together for our freedom against the controllers. And so that's why they're busy keeping us divided with this stuff, with the provocateurs and the guys with the, the Molotov cocktails at the back of the peaceful protesters.
Well, I absolutely applaud you for that. I mean, yes, him, I guess. But it's like one of the differences that I'm seeing, okay? Like, I can also talk about, Vietnam and what were we protesting there? And, how did we end up in Occupy movement? And why was that probably the beginning of the Trump success? Because people knew there was something wrong. Now, this time around, this format, I mean, in Vietnam, we were very focused on one question. We had something that was the enemy, the war. Get rid of that, and things will be better. And by the time you get to the Occupy movement, it's like they didn't really have a platform, and in fact, I heard reporters trying to get somebody to tell them what's your issue here, and basically it was something's wrong. I'm not sure what. And so now you got a whole series of things that they can point to. Boom, 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 boom. You don't keep us in the house. You don't stop us from going to church. And then you got, now we got the black issue. It's come, but they've all started focusing on these symbols. And I think that's an indication of a subconscious change in people. A sense of awareness. They're beginning to get focused on what is it that's wrong? Why do they say it's systemic?
Well, it's interesting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was just about Occupy Wall Street. Okay? Now, I have read, and it seemed pretty credible to me at the time I read it, that spin, they're like, they all just don't really know exactly which issue it is with these Occupy people. They're up, they've got these camps and tents and, blocking the streets, but they can't, they're all upset about something. Well, that I've read, it seemed credible, that was the media spin to take the teeth out of the movement. They occupied Wall Street. The corrupt financial elite. That was the issue. And that is the issue, as you and I both know, and who's behind the corrupt financial elite and what the big picture is there. And that's, that was a big part of Bernie Sanders' momentum, because he was unabashed about the corrupt financial elite and reigning in Wall Street, right? And Trump was kind of echoing that, and there were plenty of Trump supporters who might have voted for Bernie back in 2016. The demographics reflected that. If Bernie'd been nominated, he probably, had a pretty decent chance of being elected, because he was tapping that awareness that, as the Princeton study, nonpartisan study revealed, it turns out the United States is not a democracy in any meaningful sense. It is a plutocracy. The will of the people, the votes of the people have negligible impact on policy, which is determined by the big, deep-pocketed contributors to the campaigns. That, we're not a democracy, we're a plutocracy. And people are waking up to it and saying, okay, enough. That's got to stop. So what happens now? Now to me, it looks like, in a very real sense, the country's falling apart, and it needs to before it can be reborn. And it needs to be grassroots, decentralized, democratic principles, real principles of democracy being reborn, and somehow, throwing off the puppeteers. And the puppeteers are losing control. They're blowing it. Their strategies aren't working. There's massive backlash against 5G worldwide. The pandemic, they're trying to use it to implement all kinds of agendas that they've had planned, and there's a huge backlash on that. People are waking up right and left. With the riots around the George Floyd thing, it exposed, the whole Antifa trained provocateurs thing, which is a classic textbook, counterintelligence, counter-revolutionary thing right out of the pages of every training manual of every intelligence agency in the world. They've been doing it for centuries, sending in provocateurs to do something violent to justify a crackdown. So people are waking up to all this. You could get away with all this. People were too uninformed. The internet has changed all that. You could get away with FFs before. And for centuries, historians will say, oh, yes, this was a false flag. Kristallnacht with the Reichstag, the burning of the Reichstag by the Nazis. They set fire to it and blamed the Jews. Oh, yes, Pancho Villa. Oh, yes, the Mexican War. Naming all the times that a false flag was put into play to get the support they needed for a war they wanted. But bring it up to the present day, and you could get this YouTube right now pulled for some robotic analysis of the words we use here, me and Nancy, and the fact that I just used the word false flag. That could get you pulled, because God forbid you point out a current day example of what is a textbook acknowledged historical military strategic reality by mainstream historians who will cite you example after example, from the Lusitania to Operation Northwoods and on, but don't say a word about 9/11 or anything after that, because that means you're a crazy tin hat conspiracy theorist. All right?
And if you want to know the truth about 9/11, go to cosmicreality.com and go to the tab that says Books and Blogs. And you can go to when it drops down, it says Books or Blogs, and you click on that. You can get a free PDF. You can buy it on Amazon, but you get the PDF free on that site on the 9/11 Crusade, which is a fiction of 9/11, but it's much more accurate than the fiction that we were told. So just a heads up on that.
Yeah. Glad you brought that up.
Yeah, because it's important for people to understand, the full implications of what we saw that day. And I knew it instantaneously. I have no doubt about what happened that day. So what I think we're sharing here with our audience is the fact that we have layers and layers of problems, but the solution to that is to wake up. And just think of it. When we started out, and you went to Teos, New Mexico, to participate in the commissions actually looking at the 5G issue. Those people that you were with, they probably had never done anything like that before. You've got people in the streets all over the place. Let's not, don't think about since George Floyd's situation, but before that, you got an awful lot of people who suddenly know everybody in their local government by name. There's an awakening of the power of the people. That, again, every time the dark side does something, they just push people into a new, look at this, we can do this now.
Yeah, and you'd think they would learn. Because you look back at all these examples, and the British were particularly good at this, at, repressive overreaction causing the awakened rebellion that they had been trying to suppress. The classic example of that being the Easter Rising in 1916 in Ireland. They had coordinated with Germans, and it's the middle of World War I, and, it was like, we're finally going to throw off British oppression. And they knew they'd been infiltrated and betrayed. They knew that the plan was not going to work. They knew that the reinforcements were not arriving, and the date for it to happen, and they just decided, the hell with it. We're going to strike a blow anyway. We know we're doomed. We know it's going to fail. And by God, we're just going to strike a blow anyway. And they did, and it fizzled and it failed, right? And they were arrested. And the Brits went and hanged ringleaders and inflamed all of Ireland into a rebellion that would not have otherwise taken place. And, 4 or 5 years later, there's home rule. Now, granted, it's fractured home rule, and we're still dealing with the consequences of it all these years later, a century later. But it's just an example of the overreaction. You could go to India. There's multiple examples of how the British Empire did that in India, with the massacring the people of the Golden Temple at Amritsar and many others. But yeah, and then we're seeing it, 9/11 had this, 9/11 ended up being, the big wake up too many people could see, and I got to say, my reaction on that day, just to reassure all the people out there, who are waking up to stuff, I had a typical unawakened American reaction. I did not, like Nancy, instantly know what the real deal was. I said to my brother, the Arabs will never live this down. It was all about the Arabs. It was all about the line. They wanted us to believe. And they tried to take down the Twin Towers back in '93, and they didn't succeed. And now, by God, they've done it, and, just completely devastating. Let's go get those bastards. And when, Bush went into Afghanistan, I was all gung ho. I mean, I didn't like Bush. I thought he was, not the sharpest knife in the drawer. But hey, that's where bin Laden was. That's where, the plot came from. Let's go get those guys. And people would try to wake me up to the reality behind 9/11. And I would get furious. And I would say, show me the evidence. There is too much that does not work about this theory of yours. What happened to the people in the plane that supposedly hit the Pentagon? What happened, and how many people would have to be in the know? And I went down, the list of all the stuff that the skeptics and doubters say, hey, I'm sorry. How many people, it's a controlled demolition. Who set those explosives? How many people would have to be in the know? There's this many people capable of caring about a diabolical, murderous act like this. I'm sorry, I just don't believe it. And then a friend shared with me a book called Second Pearl Harbor. And it very dispassionately, objectively, without pushing some agenda or talking about the Pope and the Queen and the Illuminati, just went through all of the evidence, everything that had to happen on that day, all of, of the calling down of, the automatic responses that should have stopped that, all of, the engineering impossibility of what took place, the removal of the debris, the multiple coincidental withdrawals of protective forces that day. And it just started to add up. And I'm reading the book, and I'm going, okay, well, yeah, that's questionable. Well, that's the circumstantial thing. And when they got to about 65 pieces of this evidence, all dovetailing, and the guy had arranged it, he said, okay, so this is pieces of evidence. You can draw conclusions. Here's one set. You can say the government knew about it and decided to let it happen. The government knew about it and kind of helped it happen. Or the government knew about it, kind of helped it happen, and maybe might have planned it a little bit. Or final conclusion that actually all the evidence supports, which is that it was let's not call it the government, let's call it a supra-governmental puppet faction, actually planned it from the beginning. And I couldn't avoid that conclusion to save my life. And believe me, I wanted to, because I was a fierce and disgusted skeptic and doubter of the 9/11's an inside job theory. And it was just the hard evidence. It's like, I can't ignore this. And now I got to reconstruct my whole worldview because I can no longer. I knew there were corrupt multinational corporations. And, I wasn't naive. But anyway, Nancy saw it and I didn't. But Nancy had been in the military. And Nancy was a remote viewer. Right? Is that what enabled you to see it, Nancy?
Yeah, I've been studying this stuff for a very long time, and a lot of the time was from the inside. So I understood the capabilities of the organization of what I would call the deep state, to be able to manipulate everything from having an exercise that was an exercise that went on with the theory that a civilian aircraft is going to be hijacked in this scenario. And, it's just an exercise. It's nobody's on the battlefield or anything. It's all paper and messaging and back and forth. So that when the Northern Command got a message about it's seemingly a hijacking of a civilian aircraft, they thought it was part of the exercise. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
The thing that tipped me off within the 3D, never mind the fact that I had remoted while it was happening, but in the 3D was another coincidence that, when I was in the military, I was the senior military, but there was a civilian that was equal to me, like my partner. And when I got out of the active army, I didn't see him again or have any communication with him, until virtually 3 days before 9/11. And something happened, some weird thing happened, and I said, I'm going to see if I can get a hold of him. And I actually did get a hold of him after all that time. And we had a conversation. I said, so what are you doing now? Oh, well, I work in the Pentagon. And he proceeds to I'm asking him a few questions about what the job is, and he says, but I'll tell you, he says, I'm getting so fed up with this place. He said, I had to move my desk. The whole office had to move again. This is the third time in like the last year because of all this construction being done on the Pentagon. And I said, construction? He said, yeah, they're making it so it will withstand a missile attack. Can you imagine? Okay, this is what he said to me. And so then when the aircraft that was the one that hit the Pentagon, when it took off to the west. Now, when it took off, it had to turn to the west. Let me put it that way. I know that airport. I used to fly out of it all the time because I was stationed right there. And that if they had wanted to be able to crash the plane, you just take off and a few miles away, you just crash it into the Pentagon. But you would have crashed it into the wrong side of the Pentagon because that wasn't the one that was built to withstand a missile attack. So it flies all the way to Ohio, turns around, goes all the way past Maryland, comes back around, flies over the White House, turns and flies at over 500 miles an hour into the side of the Pentagon that was about to be ceremonial, thing about opening it, and it's done. It was days away that they were going to have this ceremony about opening up this new section that was what they hit. It was designed to take a missile attack. So one of the reasons that you see such a weird thing in the Pentagon itself was the fact that it was so highly protected in that thing. But you fly around, you do all this flying around it to hit one place on the Pentagon? Again, that would have been another 3D, boom. And so as the more I looked at it, and forgetting the fact that I knew it was pre-planned, I understood the demolition system because I was there in the head of the guy that was doing it. But forgetting all that, from just a purely intelligence officer's perception of what happened, no, this was not what they said. It couldn't have possibly have been what they said. You got a maneuver by a man who couldn't even fly a Piper biplane. He couldn't pass the pilots, and he flies it at over 500 miles an hour, taking G's in the turns that would have been very, very uncomfortable if you could have done it at all. And this is not just me talking. This is there's a whole organization, pilots on 9/11, saying these maneuvers couldn't have been done by a pilot. They had to have been controlled. And
yeah, I remember seeing those graphics.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you people just go and get that book, free PDF, I'm not trying to make any money on you, but I'm trying to give you I am an excellent researcher. And I went and found all of these little clues that say, no, there's something behind this. This doesn't make any sense. And when I would try to tell somebody, like how many people have actually read the book you cited on, the second Pearl Harbor. How many of them have actually read it? It was that information was being read by people that already sort of understood it. But the average person, they get this glassy look in their thing. So I wrote it as a fiction to be able to compel people to, when it was getting a little intense, say, it's fiction, right? And to be able to, because that's what Dan Brown taught us when he wrote the Da Vinci Code. Many historians were onto that storyline about Jesus and Mary Magdalene and the family. Many of us. But nobody would listen to us except ourselves. So he writes a fiction.
Preaching to the choir.
Yeah, everybody goes, it's just fiction. But they remember the story. So if you do read 9/11 Crusade, you're going to find that all of these little details are talked about by the characters. So it's not painful.
Yeah, well, and here we are, almost 20 years later, coming up, 19 years later, and I've been reading about some of the astrology that was current right before 9/11, also right before Dallas in 1963, that in the next month or so, particularly this coming weekend, the 20th, 21st, we are looking at, if you entertain intellectually the possibility of the pull of the planets actually having an effect, that we are looking at a similar configuration that preceded those huge shifts. But at this time, there's so much positive energy, transformational, evolutionary energy flooding into the planet that where, it's pretty hard to find beneficial consequences to November 22nd of 63 or to September 11th of 2001. Obviously, humanity wakes up from painful events, but there's a good chance that some very, events on a similarly epochal scale are headed our way very shortly, but that with a better outcome. No picnic. It's not going to be, a rose garden just yet. Anyway, it's 11:01, 1:01 on the East Coast where Nancy is. So we're ready to take our
of
station
course
break
it's
here, right,
101.
Nancy?
Yes, and this is this is the new song created by Barbara Menezes and her husband Craig Stewart, and it's called "Peace Be With You." It's just 4 minutes and 45 seconds, so we'll be
all right. Radio 5G will be back.
Settled into
And we are back.
All right, welcome back to Radio 5G. Michael Henry Dunn here with Nancy L. Hopkins. And yeah, we are still Radio 5G, talking about all the implications of that. And we go galloping off into other relevant and important territory sometimes. It's funny when we're talking about 9/11. I mean, chances are our audience doesn't need to be woken up about 9/11. It's really, needed that your book is there for them to share with people. And I have a feeling that most of the people who come to us are already fairly awakened to that. That's sort of like corrupt elite controllers 101 is the reality behind 9/11. Or maybe I'm just so used to, being in that demographic now that I think everybody else has woken up. But isn't it something like 35-40% of the American public at this point, if not more, believes it was inside job?
I have no idea. I don't know where you'd get those statistics, actually. You know what I'm saying?
What's his name? Fareed Zakaria, that commentator guy. He's, sort of mainstream media's pet Arab commentator. He got on, it's like 2 or 3 years ago, and saying, what is wrong with the American public? Can you believe it that there are 30% of the American public actually believes that 9/11 was an inside job? How gullible these people are, right? I think, okay.
Well, I bet it's a lot higher now. That's what I'm saying. I don't know how you could, because once you begin, once you begin to really start doubting and waking up, and I've said this from the get-go, when they finally wake up to 9/11, there is nothing that makes sense about that. And I just want to, for people that, the reason I tell you, go get the book, read it, because it gets you the details so that if you're talking to somebody, like Michael initially, you'd be able to say, but Michael, why is this, and why is this, and why is this, and why is this, and why is this? To start the wakening up. But the number one thing, and this comes from Dr. Judy Wood, okay? The concept is that the planes hit the towers floor, the trusses started to melt, and then crashed into the one below it, and then that weight breaks everything else down, so it's called a cascading effect. Right. Now, if you got a cascading effect, you got the momentum coming down, and it gets faster and faster as it falls, because there's more and more weight. But initially you have hesitations where it starts to, fractions of seconds, but this becomes important, because what happened was that the towers fell, if you want to think of them falling, in 10 seconds. That's free fall. Yeah. Okay? Now, if you're talking about, 72, the 72nd floor is been hit, and it starts to go. 72 floors are crashing into one another. Okay? I want you to clap your hands 72 times and see if it takes you 10 seconds. There's not a physical way that you can do that. Okay? Yeah. So right from there, does this make any sense to anybody? And then at the bottom of the pile, you have 72 floors that suddenly are only 7 feet tall. How can that be? Mm-hmm. Where's everything? What happened? Well, the reality is in that 7 feet, what you find is virtually nothing. Because if you think in terms of what you actually saw, you saw these towers turn to dust. You didn't see them falling. You see the initial beginning to fall, but then it all turns to dust. Okay? And that dust hung around for a very, very long time and was very dangerous. It had all sorts of chemicals in it because it was...
Right. There was a lot of, apart from all the firemen and police who died in the towers themselves, there were a lot of subsequent...
Well, the people were never found either. There were no bodies.
I just mean in terms of the toxic effects of the
right. But this,
particles.
But the thing of it
rescue.
is that the only thing that they actually found a lot of, okay, after it was all said and done, was plastic and paper. Plastic and paper. There was no metal. It was all gone. They found one filing cabinet. Now this is a 72, and each floor is like an acre of offices and desks and doors and door handles, and where did all this go? They found one file cabinet that was compressed to the size of a basketball. Okay, kind of melted into the size of a basketball. And inside of this melted thing that nobody knew what it was initially are pieces of blue and red filing folders. It was a filing cabinet. That's it. That's the metal that they found after all this is done. So you see, nothing makes sense about it.
Yeah, it's all pretty unignorable, at this point, from our point of view. I wonder if we could bring in this article
yes,
that
please,
I shared
please.
with you earlier on. Yeah. So this is from International Business Times, and it was cited on ehtrust.org, and we really recommend that. If you go to our 5G-know.com site, that's for Radio 5G, 5G-know.com. We have a list of lots of helpful links, and this is one of them, ehtrust.org. Excellent, hard scientific information there. And they cite this article in International Business Times, and the headline is, Burning 5G Towers Across Europe is Harming Health, Wildlife, and the Climate. Now, this is in response, people were starting to burn 5G towers. I've only heard of the stories of it happening in Europe because of a reputed link to the virus, right? So this is a really worthwhile article. We've posted it here, and we'll have it when this goes to YouTube so you can check on it. But let me just read a little bit about this. Reports of cell towers being burned and telecom workers being harassed in the UK, Netherlands, Ireland, and Cyprus is something scientists around the world are rightly condemning. Violent actions will only beget violent consequences for the very environment these misguided opponents seek to protect. Ironically, those living in the shadow of these towers will face the most serious hazards from any attempt to set them aflame. Where a tower or other equipment can be made to ignite, this requires the use of highly toxic, combustible, flammable chemicals and accelerants. If telecom equipment is set afire, this then can release a spew of toxic metals, plastics, and invisibly deadly knife-like slivers of glass that can rain environmental hazards onto anyone nearby and could permanently damage the local environment for years. Okay, so they're making this point, and it's a good one, Then they go on to discuss the background on it. News reports are attributing the wanton destruction of telecom properties in the UK to purported conspiracy-fueled paranoia from luminaries like Woody Harrelson, John Cusack, who have questioned whether exposures from wireless millimeter waves of 5G could worsen the coronavirus. Hang on a second. Let's look at what these celebrities have really said. Contrary to what has been asserted, none of them have suggested that wireless signals from 5G actually cause the virus. And expressing her own concerns, British pop star MIA correctly tweeted, "I don't think 5G gives you coronavirus." Now, we have to start out with some inconvenient complexities of the science. Whatever the 5G network will eventually be, there is no question that it will have to be able to switch back and forth between 3G and 4G symptoms that have already been shown to cause cancer and damage sperm. If 5G does not incorporate these earlier frequencies, all those devices we already own would not work. So they're talking about densification, right, Nancy? So in much of the world, wherever 5G will be operating, it will be using the same frequencies as these earlier technologies, sub-6 gigahertz range. So then it goes on to share about how major insurance companies are coming. This is like the good news for those of us who are fighting 5G that is being lost in all of the fear mongering and genuine fear and everything else going on between the riots and the pandemic. Now, let me just read a couple of paragraphs here so that we can take some heart. One of the world's oldest corporate reinsurance companies, Swiss Re, by the way, for those who don't know, a reinsurance company is an insurance company that insures insurance companies, right? Let's back up. They've long had doubts about 5G, and looking at what is known about the evolving technologies as of May 2019, this large secondary insurer refused to cover potential health or environmental damages from telecom systems, especially 5G, pronouncing this evolving technology potentially as problematic as asbestos, a toxic fiber that bankrupted so many firms. There's a list of over 100 manufacturers, including John Mansville, Owens Corning, W.R. Grace, that now form the Asbestos Trust Fund from which injured parties can seek compensation. That's like, asbestos is like a buzzword for huge, disastrous underestimation by insurers of the toxic effects of something everybody was being told was safe. After reviewing reports from throughout Europe where some governments concerned about the lack of safety testing have brought a halt to proposed installations, Swiss Re, this huge insurance company, declared 5G to be, quote, off the leash. What led such a firm, which is worth $36 billion with a profit of $2.1 billion last year, to conclude that 5G constitutes a huge business risk, and this is a year ago, before COVID, is probably worth examining. The liabilities of 5G and telecom operations that this company foresaw more than a year ago were not a result of virally spreading conspiracy theories ricocheting around the internet, but reflected the due diligence of serious underwriters that fingered several critical matters. And underwriters, for those of you who don't know, are the people who actually do the hard, detailed work of looking at the risk factors for insurance companies. For example, they noted that cybersecurity threats are worsened by the prospect of defending the doubled number of new antennas required by a 5G system. In addition, the report worried that squabbling over information security and national sovereignty and the growing potential for espionage or sabotage could upend international cooperation and impact financial markets negatively. We're already seeing that happen with the big debate over Huawei. Are we importing, compromised Chinese intelligence devices into our whole communications network? This Swiss Re report also observed within Europe there's a broad range of governmental responses to wireless radiation overall. And then since the report was written a year ago, this includes a halt to 5G last month by the nation of Slovenia because they want scientific review. In contrast, assurances that all is well are being provided by unelected, self-appointed groups like the so-called International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection are accepted without question, and they form the basis for the FCC to move full speed ahead with no safety testing. Other expert commentators have called for disbanding this so-called International Commission. Still, other groups warn that the proposed 5G system could interfere with weather prediction, such as the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and what will be the impact of 20,000 5G satellites. Advanced nations like Switzerland, France, and Israel are carrying out their own investigations of how to make all telecommunications technology safer. Those who are concerned about cellular networks and the prospects of 5G include serious scientists like those that run the French National Agency to evaluate public health impacts of radiation, who issued a 265-page report in 2019 and are in the process of evaluating what it terms, quote, a lack of scientific data on the potential biological and health effects linked to exposure to 5G. They conclude here and say, without question, burning private property is a crime, and this should be stopped. So should the degradation of our environment by untested technologies. And that article was written by Dr. Devra, D-E-V like Victory, R-A, Dr. Devra Davis, who was president of ehtrust.org. She served in the Clinton administration from 93 to 97 and was a member of the IPCC Scientists awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. So I thought it was just worth bringing that in, because it's simultaneously kind of pointing out the mainstream media tendency to demonize the Stop 5G movement Yeah, a bunch of harebrained celebrities who are buying conspiracy theories have got people burning telecom towers in the UK. Well, there's more to it than that. And yes, burning telecom towers is against the law. And we are not recommending it here on Radio 5G.
And it's very dangerous and, difficult for the environment. So, no, that's not the option we have. I mean, that's a last-ditch effort. You don't do it now. There's so many other ways of shutting this down. And like I say, I think that one of the benefits of the protests is demonstrating to people that they do have power. And, if this other stuff stops being a distraction and they realize that, what we're talking about when we're talking about 5G is the real indicator of how far this deep, dark cabal wants to go. And like I say, yeah. I think because of the president's executive order from last month, saying that he's going to disband the telecommunications group that's been making all the decisions, and a new one be set up, and that new one is required to look at virtually every piece of equipment being bought from any foreign, not even just manufactured in a foreign country, but if a foreign, let's say, broker was making the deal, they all have to be looked at. That this is going to shut down 5G for a while because we don't have the ability to build it. So I think there has been semi-moratorium on it in what I see.
Well, here I'm gonna bring something in here. I'm gonna see if I can do it in a delicate, euphemistic way that allows us to talk about the pandemic and FIVE, letter between F and H. Just like how David Wilcock on his programs refers to QAnon. It's like, okay, I don't want to be taken down from YouTube, so I can't be talking about Q. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we're talking about the military intelligence source that is the letters between R and S, the letter between R and S, I hope we don't have to get that convoluted and ridiculous here, but I'm going to try because when we're talking about 5G and the bug, as we'll call it, and, there's plenty of YouTubes out there. Like Dana Ashley has got some really hard-hitting information in her YouTubes out there. You familiar with her? The young woman from Southern California?
Yes, I think we've played some of her. I know we have on the New York situation.
Right. Very impressive. Hard information about let's just call it 60 gigahertz and above radiation toxicity symptoms, and how they mirror the symptoms of the bug. And so, but we've talked about this, about oxygen deprivation. Your body just is not able to absorb it under toxic radiation symptoms, and people just falling over and get put into the ICU, emergency room, and by God, you've got COVID, because obviously you do. We don't have time to test you, but we're going to put you in the hallway with a ventilator, and a few hours later you're dead. I hope another $30,000 for us. We'll list that as a COVID death. Now, there is obviously a very well-established scientific basis for weakening of the immune system by 3G, 4G, and, of course, 5G. And a healthy immune system is obviously our best defense against anything out there. So the weakening of our immune systems by the densification of 3, 4, and 5G is not being brought out. That's to start with. But, when we're looking ahead down the road here at the fear-mongering agenda, the control agenda, the censoring agenda, everything that is being rolled out, the vaccination agenda, World Health Organization, Bill Gates, and I feel like saying, just about every time I mention Bill Gates' name and everybody's like starting to come out with, oh, he was thrown out of India for killing, children with the vaccine program and this and that. And let's always remember to say, oh, by the way, Bill Gates made 17 trips on Jeffrey Epstein's plane to the pedophile island. Okay, just let's remember that for what it's worth. Anyway, that the upshot of all this, going forward, the anticipation of a so-called second wave, right? The statistics are not nearly turning out to be what they told us they were going to be back when we all shut down America, above 2 million deaths. It's 100,000, which is slightly above a bad flu season. And look, we're not saying there's not a pandemic. We're not saying, COVID isn't real. We're not saying it's not seriously, highly dangerous for the elderly and for those with pre-existing conditions. That, this is not some, radical wacko unbased, speculation thing. We do our homework here. We know what the science is. And the numbers are not what was being used to justify the shutdown of America. So the so-called second wave, do we want to talk about this, Nancy, about the anticipated potential interaction of an intensification of 5G in the coming months, say, leading up to the election, perhaps? Is that an area that you feel comfortable going into, talking about, exploring in terms of what possible correlation could be possibly in preparation between the densification and rollout and the second wave and, political manipulation? Is that an area we want to go into?
I don't think anything like that's going to happen. Right now, we were, on day one, we're like all concerned about the masks and distancing, and then we have revolts in the streets, and now everybody is running around without masks and hugging each other. And the other story just falls off. The 5G story, I'm telling you, I feel like it's dead in the water right now. That there's nothing, I know that people are saying that they're putting in the systems and stuff, and I agree, that probably was happening, but they're going to run out of equipment. If you can't get more equipment because the president has stopped any kind of activity in that way until it's reviewed, well, then you don't have the equipment to continue building. It's not their intent has changed. It's just all of a sudden he's put a stop on their supply of equipment. So I don't see that as being like a critical question. As far as the pandemic thing, this thing is falling apart. And in the whole scenario has made people now, it's revolutionized the medical industry, because now people are calling doctors and, I've had more people that actually were using the service say, this is better than going to the doctor, because I get to talk to the doctor. A lot of times you go in, he did it, he comes in, out the door again. But that they're feeling more comfortable with this interaction with the medical profession. There's so many changes in the medical profession. There's so many changes in the way that businesses are going to operate. There's going to be a lot more people staying home. So these changes are just part of what had just happened. And every time you look at it, what has happened, you realize that it's like a demonstration of the things that were wrong. Yes, the police, they need to be fixed. The medical system is just outrageously awful. The financial system, where's he getting all this money? Where's Trump getting all this money, Michael? You think he's making it up and taking it from nowhere? You think he doesn't?
Money
what is it, $30 trillion?
What, the money for the bailouts?
Yeah.
The same place to get all the money. It's fiat currency based on nothing. Just, let's ramp up the printing machines and, a few more $1 trillion of debt that the American people are just forgetting to pay any attention to. And oh, by the way, we paid for it because when the Fed issues it, it's all rigged so that, you're paying on the dollar for every dollar that the kind banking cabal has decided they're going to generate for you. And, it's the same old crazy system. Yeah, there's, where's the money coming from? Air, like it's been coming from for decades.
Well, that's probably true. I mean, in the essence, it is true. But there's something that a lot of people, I don't think they paid enough attention to it. I did, and others did. But a bit back, virtually the first executive order he wrote, the president declared people who are committing inhumane acts to have their banks, all their finances frozen.
Right, that was a trafficking thing, right? If you were involved in human trafficking, they could seize your assets.
No, it wasn't only human trafficking. It was crimes against humanity. It was under that umbrella. Okay? I mean, that included the trafficking, but it was really, a carte blanche to anybody that has done anything that, the rest of us would think is inhuman, whatever it could be, So, and then that's because if you're trafficking, it's one thing, but if you're getting, something out of that trafficking, but you're not really trafficking, if you're the final, user, that's why it was all encompassing, not just the people trafficking. Anyway, so when we got the president making this particular executive order, nobody's exactly sure, okay, what really happened. But it's very likely, and this is coming from a lot of different places, not a lot, but a few different places that makes you go, that's really interesting, is that he might have all their money. The federal government might be paying for everything we're being given from funds that were essentially taken over because of the 10,000 indictments that are still sealed but can be used by other courts. You know what I mean?
Okay, well, 100,000, supposedly it's 100,000, right?
100,000, yeah.
Yeah, but the thing about a sealed indictment, it needs to be unsealed, and then the case needs to be tried before it can seize anybody's assets. Or can you seize them in the meantime, freeze them? I don't know if you can
with the executive order that he issued. Okay, now yes, that you're probably going to have massive kind of legal, but you've tried to work with the law. The law is whatever the judge decides it is. It's like legality is so wishy-washy. It's the law. Oh, really?
Yeah, well, just to let you know that we are not wishy-washy here on Radio 5G.
No, we're not.
An expert fact-checking team at work 24/7 behind the scenes, and they've just received an updated report from our fact-checking chief, Eleni, who is noting that I specifically uttered a factual inaccuracy only minutes ago here on Radio 5G, and I'm here to correct it right up front, right? Which is that in making fun of our friend David Wilcock and how he was trying to hide his reference to QAnon, I said that David was saying, yes, it's the letter between R and S. And as any school child knows, Q comes between P and R. So just want to let you know, here at Radio 5G, we check our facts. And I apologize for that misstatement. So anyway.
You wouldn't want to misquote David Wilcock.
No. So anyway.
Thank you, Eleni.
Yeah. There we go.
You'll get a bonus this week in your paycheck.
Yeah, that's right. For sure. Anyway, I'm sorry. When I saw that come across on my text, I couldn't resist. I had to own up to that. Sorry to take us off track a little bit.
Okay, we were talking
what were
about
we saying?
We were talking about burning of the towers and all that. Now, yes, the reason that you see a correlation between 5G and the spread of the virus, especially in the initial onslaught, is because the 5G breaks down the immune system. So in the very city that had more 5G for over 6 months than any place else, you have a population that is already wounded, and it could have been anything that, set it off. And then you look and you see that, yes, areas where there was 5G was where you had the most activity. New York City has been 5G for probably, well, let me put it to you this way. It's intensification, even just intensification, but they have had an extreme amount of electromagnetic energy in that city.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising at all. But there is, if you just look at the maps and you do the comparison yourself, you can see that there is, and you can actually, anybody that wants to, I don't have it right in my head or in front of me, but there is a website where you can get updated information about 5G antennas in your neighborhood. And so do a Google search on that, and when you see the page come up, it's like a world map. You have to click on it to get it to go closer and closer to where you are. Like I'm in Florida, so I start clicking on Florida, and it'll take you virtually down to the street where the dang thing is. So,
well, that's what you want to know, folks. Just don't go set it on fire.
Just don't set it on fire. Yeah, but
we've got better avenues, better ways to bring this thing to a stop.
And it actually tells you, if you hover over it, I think it'll put up one of these information things, and it'll tell you the telecommunications company that owns it and how much power it's got.
And then go look up how big a political campaign contribution that telecom company made to your local county commissioner or mayor or other person who is backing 5G, just as a little interesting piece of information. So, we were on one track that I just remembered. I think it might be worth revisiting. We were talking about the sealed indictments, right?
Yeah.
And the initial executive order Trump gave when he first came in about seizure of the assets of those either convicted of or indicted for. It's a big question, crimes against humanity, because really you cannot, I believe, under the Constitution, seize the assets and take permanently the assets of someone who is merely indicted. If they are convicted and a judgment is rendered to seize assets, that's a different thing. But, in terms of the sealed indictments, you keep hearing things about how any day now. Do you have any updates from your end on any indictments being unsealed, any significant cases being, we just love to give people some well-founded hope out there that the sealed indictments are real.
Oh, I know they're real. You can go to the website, a U.S. federal website, and you can see how many sealed indictments are out there. Count them yourself. They're real.
I know from the database. I just mean real in terms of.
Oh yeah. The Attorney General has been making. Let's say if you listen to him, they're unsealing certain things. Very cautiously, and it all has to do with this, the Durham report, I think they're calling it. It's an assistant district attorney that's doing looking into the same information that they used to impeach the president. So there is a lot of things happening, and the Attorney General said, if you don't worry about paraphrasing, but don't worry about the fact that the people that we're talking about are going to be brought to trial or brought to justice. He said, but it takes a time. Just be patient with it. And
right.
So they're talking about some very, very big cases, and there's only so much they can say. They're sealed for a reason.
Right. I understand that. My concern as I look down the road is, okay, how many of these sealed indictments began under the Obama administration, or did it only start with Trump? I'm trying to remember that. And, if a Democratic administration comes in, let's suppose Joe Biden comes in January next year, right? Are we getting to a place in this country where the supposedly independent Justice Department was not supposed to be under the political control? Yes, the Attorney General is appointed by the President. Yes, there's influence. Yes, it's been misused in the past, but it was never to the point like it is with so-called banana republics or dictatorships in various places in the world where you sure didn't want to lose power, because the moment you lost power as a dictator or as a president, the new administration's Justice Department was going to turn on you and prosecute you and try to put you in jail, seize your assets. And it was just back and forth using a corrupted Justice Department as a political weapon. Are we at that place? I think it's a question worth looking at in terms of, okay, I would love to believe these sealed indictments are like from the bottom up, getting foot soldiers, middle management, up to the corrupt elite, particularly with, the pedophile networks and treason. And let's start, it's both sides of the aisle. It's not, just Democrat or Republican. Obviously, the cabal has its tentacles on both sides. So are we at that place where we're going to go, okay, if Biden gets in, look for the Justice Department to be defanged on all these sealed indictments, which will never get unsealed? What do you think?
Well, remember, a sealed indictment has already been presented to a grand jury. The grand jury looks at the evidence, and the question to the grand jury, and these are, just regular people, the question to the grand jury is, based on the evidence, would you convict or not? And if they said, I would convict, then it becomes you actually issue essentially the first piece of paper that indicts them, says we're indicting you on this right now. You have been indicted, but we are sealing it for now. We're not letting the information out. And that's, could at that point, if that's what all these are and that's what they're supposed to be, that's what it states on the federal website. If that's so, then is it possible for another president to come in and try to stop something that's already in the hands of not just the Justice Department but the court systems? Well, yeah, I suppose so. If you got some crazy ass judge like the one that's involved in the what's his name? He was going to be the head of the intelligence community and secretary. What's his name? Jeez. General Quinn. General Quinn.
Judge Quinn?
No.
General Quinn.
General Quinn. Sullivan is the judge. And the Justice Department looked at all the information and said, wow, nobody would indict this guy. He was set up by ourselves. And so they went to the judge and said, hey, Judge, we decided we don't want to prosecute this guy. And the judge decides that he's not going to let that happen. So you can have these...
talking about General Flynn, Michael Flynn.
Michael Flynn, not Quinn. Flynn. Yes, Michael. There's, right now, it's like everybody that I'm listening to is saying that this is unheard of, that a judge would do this. It doesn't exactly go against the law, but it's never been done before.
Right.
What
There's
is
a lot
this?
of that going on.
So I can't answer your question, Michael. There's too many variables and too much weirdness going on.
I hear you. So, in terms of unsealing any one particular indictment, right? So is that in the hands of a local federal prosecutor? Is that, simply approved or not, unsealed or not by Barr, Attorney General Barr?
No, these are all by jurisdiction. If you look at it, it's like the Circuit Court of D.C., the Circuit Court of L.A.
That's what I
yeah,
was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how is it that now you got tens of thousands, more than 100,000 sealed indictments, and across all these jurisdictions. And there, in each case, there's a matter of timing and evidence and what else they got on the docket and what they're going to prosecute first. All this stuff, how full their caseload is. All these things that come into consideration, about whether or not to unseal an indictment. It just seems a little odd that after, several years like this, we've got no unsealed indictments by any of these different prosecutors across all these jurisdictions.
No, it's not that we don't have. That's not the point. Some of these have been already. A lot of the pedophilia were part of that 100,000. I mean, just a couple months ago, they took out a ring in northern Florida and Georgia. And these were indictments that had been made and sitting there and waiting until they could get everything in line. And because they also got 2 states involved in it. I think maybe there was a third one. But anyway, so they're complicated legal action that's being taken. But those were part of the 100,000. There's an L.A. group that supposedly, I don't remember, it was dozens and dozens of them. Again, sealed indictments that were unsealed. But nobody's going to, announce, we're unsealing this indictment that's part of the 100,000. That's not the way it's happening. It's happening like when they can get the cases together for the underlings, the ones that they need to get out of the way, then they unseal them.
Well, more will be revealed, I always like to tell myself. And I know it's just a matter of patience. We need to understand these things take time. But, people are running out of patience is the problem. And given everything that's going down, I don't know.
It's very interesting.
But yeah, these are good perspectives for us to share. Makes sense.
It's very interesting that you used the word patience, because on the Shungite show yesterday, the message from Shungite, every week, Barbara Menezes, who is able to, communicate with Shungite and then, take the information she's getting and put it into a message that is Shungite's message as Barbara understands it. And this week's message was on, it's specifically, be patient. That was the message, be patient. Come to a sense of peace.
Yeah, that's what we're getting here. Go ahead.
If you don't allow yourself to disengage from the drama and sort of like, think of it as, you just get off the stage, sit back and look at what's happening. But more importantly, don't focus on what's happening in the stage. Look around what's happening around you. Spend more time just coming to a state of, the second word was peace. Come to a state of peace, because we are we're just coming to the end of, and there's going to be, still ripples there, but the basic blast of cosmic energy that we've just gone through. Because, a lot of times we say, well, okay, we're getting bathed in energy, where'd it come from? Well, we as a solar system are traveling at, millions of miles an hour through the galaxy. And so we're continually changing our position and therefore our environment. And in this particular time frame, there is a tremendous amount of a specific type of energy that is just, it's a field. It's like when we first started crossing into this essentially new age, in quotes, we ended up in a proton belt. Well, we're still in the proton belt, but the proton belt is being fed because we are lined up with the black hole or the black star that's in the middle of the galaxy, Milky Way galaxy. Right. So you're getting energy that we don't necessarily only have. In fact, we only get it, it's about every 15,000 years that you have at the 15,000 mark and at the 30,000 mark, 27 something. But at those two positions, you're getting lined up with the energy coming, because we think of the black hole as sucking in energy. and it does, 3D energy, but it's also throwing out another type of energy, an energy that we call, cosmic energy. And that energy that we're in right now is working to upgrade the DNA. So everybody's, and whether you believe me or not, if I'm right, it's happening to you. You don't have to have a belief system here. It's just a matter of physics. So your DNA is sort of like being lit up. The way I think of it is like you got a Christmas tree, and one set of lights isn't on, and then you plug it in. Boom! Now you got a full, looking Christmas tree. Neat. So that's what we're going through right now. Right now. So what Shungite, and obviously you're feeling the same thing, is that we have to have a state of patience. Just relax. Don't get caught up in the drama. In a state of peace, and to focus not on the future, and certainly not on the past. Think in terms of the present, and get yourself really sort of like balanced, because you're doing an upgrade, and when you do an upgrade, a lot of times you'll have discordant energies as the energies try to reset. You also, at the 3D, can have a toxicity situation. You're detoxing. And you might lead a lot of sleep, because, when you're in the sleep environment, it's easier to make these energetic changes. So, that's where we're at now. We're in a revolutionary cosmic environment. And the fact that you were talking earlier about the similarity of 9/11 and President Kennedy's assassination, and right now as far as the astrological signs, makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
It might be that we're always damned to repeat the past, to give ourselves another opportunity to make it right, because we keep going around in a circle just because we're on the planet.
Yeah, well, like I was saying, this emphasis on patience and peace and the present, let's call it PPP, right? That just be present to this moment with, and to the peace of this moment. And if you're in nature, if you're lucky enough to be around nature, get out, breathe some air, see the sky and the trees, and to be patient. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Aldous Huxley, who we had on Radio 5G. Of course, he's been dead for a very long time, but an interview he did with Mike Wallace a very long time ago, looking towards the likelihood of a pervasive surveillance government. And Aldous Huxley did a lot of writing about what he called the perennial philosophy. And he talks about this crucial importance in any spiritual path of not getting afraid of the future or agonizing over the past, but being present in this moment is where the magic is. And he said, this is a quote, "The present moment is the only aperture through which we can pass from time into eternity." And if you want to talk about being able to commune with Source, commune with the divine, well, we can't do it when we're worrying about the future, and we can't do it when we're agonizing about the past. And given what all of us are going through right now, to be able to access divine guidance and intuition and support, it's like you say, we need to do it in this moment. And be present and patient.
Well, the rest of the message was to realize your beingness. Okay, that the key here is that we tend to think in terms of becoming. I want to become. No, stop that, because you're doing it in the future. To get to the concept of the magic in the present, you go, I'm all together. I know my beingness. I'm that person I've always wanted to be. Begin to realize that by anchoring it into the present and taking it out of the future, you are the person you want to be, the person you were sent here to evolve into. But it comes from getting a calmness, a peace, and to realize your beingness, your being. Not you're becoming, exactly. But your being.
Right. Be here now, or as Robin Williams said, be here now or go there later. Yeah. Funny thing about, well, we won't call it funny, we'll call it ironic, about Aldous Huxley, with that quote. Aldous Huxley, a lot of people didn't realize he had died when he died, even though he was a very famous author, because guess what date he died on? November 22nd, 1963. And so his passing went unnoticed because, of course, JFK was assassinated in Dallas that day. Yeah, kind of ironic tie into what we were sharing here. Well, we're coming up on the last couple of minutes, and I love how we can go on this journey and be able to share, a wide range of perspectives and information. I hope all you folks out there have gotten a lot out of it. I certainly do. Whenever I have a conversation with Nancy, and between bringing in the messages from Shungite, the intuitive messages that are streaming in, cosmic energy shifting our DNA, while we're having to be present to all these incredible challenges that we're all going through right now. I'm just grateful to be able to have these conversations with you, Nancy, on Radio 5G, and we've been going for coming up on a year and a half here, amazingly. So I hope that it won't be too long before there's no need for a radio show called Radio 5G that we've broken through. Chances are it's going to be a little while, but here we are, and we'll keep being here.
Sooner than later. Hey, so last week you said that Kerry Cassidy is now in agreement that Q might be real and JFK Jr. might be alive?
Yeah, she was totally on board with it, committed to it, said yes, absolutely, she is convinced.
Did she mention why she's convinced? Did she meet
inside sources, intuition, and dreams, all three.
Oh, okay.
But there was the inside source. She's all about whistleblowing, inside sources, and sources that she trusts and has learned to trust over a period of years are telling her that, the Q and JFK Jr. thing is correct. Q is, as you know, subject to all kinds of different interpretations, and that there'd be some big event towards the end of July that would be an epical shifting event, and that a lot of this would go public by then. That's what Kerry committed. She said, yeah, this is what I'm hearing, and this is what I'm convinced is going to happen.
And that's the reason that I'm saying, I wouldn't put too much, focus on the things that we're focusing on now, because I think that in the very near future, things are going to change so radically that they're not going to seem important anymore.
I believe that too. And I think we're in an accelerated time, and 3 months from now, 3 weeks from now, who knows? The world could be a very different place. Yep. Here's hoping. All right, well, thanks for joining us, everybody, on Radio 5G, which is a joint project of Cosmic Reality Radio and the Sacred Academy of Global Evolution. And this is Michael Henry Dunn with my co-host Nancy Hopkins signing off, and looking forward to having you with us next time. God bless everybody. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening. May it be.
Let it be.